Hi guys, so something I want to say and make clear is that very often practice swords or blunt swords that are used for either HEMA training or reenactment or things like this are by their nature very often made much more robust than actual real swords were. Now the reasons for this are several. One is sometimes because the people who make the replica swords for practice or for reenactment don't necessarily have a lot of experience at handling original swords. In many cases they've just seen pictures of original swords in books, and so with their preconceptions they fabricate swords to how they think they should be. But another reason is actually that very simply a practice sword gets used a lot more than a real sword ever will. So if we think about that for a second, a practice sword, what you want from it is, obviously it's going to be blunt most of the time. It's going to be a blunt sword, and it's going to have a guard, be it a cross guard or a sabre guard or rapier guard, whatever type of guard it's got, that's going to be used probably several times a week or at least once a week for training, and is going to have to take a lot of abuse essentially. A real sword, a sharp sword on the other hand, even the most dedicated duelist of the 16th or 17th centuries they wouldn't be fighting a duel every week in general. They wouldn't be going to war every week. They wouldn't be using their sword as a weapon on a weekly basis as they might be using a practice weapon. So very simply, elements like the guard of the sword, yes, it is there to protect your hand. However, on a real sword, the guard is not there to be hit week in, week out on a regular basis in rough and tumble sort of sparring or fencing practice. And the other thing to remember, of course, is that even within just one encounter, a real fight will but with an individual, if it's a duel for example, will have a certain number of things that will happen in it, movements that will happen in it, phrases to the action, but it will not last an incredibly long time. Sparring or fencing practice will last probably longer because you will repeatedly hit the opponent and they will repeatedly hit you, and hopefully neither of you will be wounded because you're using safe weapons and protective equipment, and so the fight will go on. A real fight isn't like this. If you wound the opponent gravely, that's pretty much the end of the fight. Okay? So even within an individual fight, the weapon itself doesn't encounter as much damage or abuse or impacts with an opponent's weapon or body as a practice weapon will do. And this comes back again to the subject of edge damage that I've talked about in previous videos. When you have a real sword, an antique sword or a sword that is made for actually fighting, you have an edge which is kept sharp, and you have hilt components that are strong enough to do their job, but they're not over-engineered like a practice weapon will be, because they're only there to do their job for the number of times that you're likely to have to use this weapon in protection of your life or to take someone else's. Okay, so there we go. I hope that I've quickly skimmed over some of the reasons why real swords are very often more slightly built and actually in some ways a little bit more fragile than practice weapons are. And if you go to a good museum which has good examples to look at of, say for example, Renaissance rapiers or even medieval swords, and you look at the thickness of the bars of the guard, for example, you will see that they are almost always narrower and lighter and a little bit more fragile than most modern replicas are, because modern replicas tend to be over-engineered in order to stand up to abuse and lots of practice, which the original swords actually didn't need to stand up to. And this is one of the reasons that contributes to replica swords tending to be overweight compared to the originals. Okay, thank you.